Hey guys, I recently read a book called The Paideia Proposal, and it's by Mortimer Adler. And he wrote this, I think, in the 1980s when he was looking at the public school system and he felt like, look, it's not working right. And specifically, here are the problems, and this is what I think you ought to change in order to have a much better educational system. And I was reading this book looking for principles of education so I could do a better job in my homeschool. And what I found was really interesting. He had 3 different things that he said, these are the methods that we should use when we teach. And it was really fascinating. I definitely rebelled against the first one, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I need to correct my behavior. I am not doing as good a job at this as I should. So the first method of teaching, he says, that we really need to use is didactic teaching. Mortimer, I love Mortimer. That's a really big word. All it means is lecture. We should lecture. And this is the one that I rebelled against. I was like, no, I hate sitting there and telling my kids to sit down, shut up, and just listen to me. And I really pushed back and thought, I don't want to be a lecturer. But he said, this is the one that we should spend the least amount of time on because it is the least effective. But guess what? You can't skip it. And this is the part that I really felt like I needed to adjust because I don't love lecturing. And I know that I may not be a really great reflection of what a lot of you feel like. But the lady that I was discussing this with, she was in the same boat, that she felt like, I've kind of gone so far toward this, unschooling and freedom of learning kind of thing that I don't spend enough time lecturing on things that need to be lectured. So let me be clear on things that need to be lectured. It's very minimal, and it's just things that the kids have never considered before. They've never thought of before. They have no idea of how to do it. In fact, I was in college. I remember this. I'd actually already graduated with my associate's degree, and I was working for full time, but I also felt like this driving need to learn. And so I signed up for a class in a local college, and I just was taking one class, and I took it in the evenings. And when I went there, one day the teacher was gone. And so the student aide got up and she was teaching. And I remember she was teaching the lesson on neurons and the structure of neurons and how they fire, how the different components come together, and the sodium and the potassium, and how they switch together. And see, I'm doing a terrible job explaining this, but she did a terrible job explaining it, that I sat there and I took notes the whole time. And when she was done, I thought, I don't even know what you were talking about. I could never explain what the point of this lecture was. I don't get it. And then the next day or week or whenever it was, the teacher was back, and he did that same lecture, and the lights went on, and I suddenly understood it, and I was like, oh, you're talking about a neuron cell, and you're talking about the proportion of cells or of molecules that need to be on the outside of the cell versus on the inside of the cell in order to create this flash in the pan that will cause it to fire and send a message to the next cell. I couldn't even explain that. After the first time that she explained it to me, I didn't even know what the subject matter was. And I really think the ability to teach, to lecture and explain something that you've never come across before, I didn't know anything about that. I didn't understand that concept at all. It was a whole new idea to me. It had to be told to me. It had to be lectured in a way that I got it. So it's not enough to just say, I need to tell you stuff. You have to do it in a way that makes sense. And probably that was a really terrible example because I'm not sure it made any sense to any of you, but they took an hour to explain it to me. So it was a bigger lecture. But the point is, you do have to lecture, you do have to explain things that kids have never come across before. You have to explain it in a way that makes sense to them, and you have to explain it in a way that they're able to open their mind and be able to be excited about it. Because after he came back, after he explained that to me, I was so excited about it. I thought, oh my goodness, the nervous system is amazing, and I'm so excited to learn more about the system. And when she explained it, I thought, I'm not sure which system this belongs to. So it was really, really important to have a good job lecturing, to be able to not only explain something as it really is, but to be able to excite inside of the individual students so that they want to learn more about it. And that I'm not very good at. I tend to skip that part because I don't want to be a lecturer. I don't want to sit up and tell you stuff and you should just know things. But they don't. They don't just know things. They need to be exposed to ideas. And so there needs to be that first part where you are actually teaching them through lecture. And a lecture can be, I'm going to give examples, and I'm going to tell stories, and I'm going to draw things on the board. It does not have to be dry and boring. In fact, it shouldn't be. But there does need to be that part where you are imparting knowledge that they've never had before. So that is the first method of teaching, and it should be the smallest method. Okay, on to the second. The second method is coaching that produces the skills of learning. Here are the skills of learning. Reading, right? You have to teach your kids how to read. write. This is a skill they have to learn. How to study, how to be able to focus and make logical leaps and be able to put ideas together and try them out and experiment. How to study. Logic, listening, building, creating. All of these things are the skills of learning. And so we need to be able to help our children go from just I'm hearing something to I'm learning about that something. I'm going to read about it. I'm going to write about it. I'm going to, and it's also taking the time and saying you need to learn how to read. And so how he says the style that you use, the method that you use for this is not didactic, right? It's not lecture, it's coaching. And this is going to be one-on-one or maybe one on a couple where you're able to sit down. And piano is a really good example. You're going to coach them through piano. You're going to sit down with them and you're going to help them practice their bit and then talk to them about good job on this, maybe make some adaptations over here, maybe you should fix this, let's practice a little bit more, but it's very personalized to them, what they need to be able to really become better in this particular piece. Same thing with reading. That shape is a D and it makes this sound, and this is how we sound that letter and then the next two letters together and blend them together. You coach them through that. You can't just lecture and say this is how you do it. They have to actually practice doing this. They have to practice blending sounds. They have to practice reading over and over again. And they really need somebody who's going to sit there with them and say, yes, that is the D. I remember telling you that was a D and I know you heard it, but it can be hard to remember what you heard. So I'm going to sit down and coach you through this and work with you and practice until you're really good at this skill of reading or writing or studying or logic. We're actually we have a book called The Fallacy Detective, and we're going through and doing practices in logic. Can you understand the different pieces of an argument? Now I lecture them, right? I read this first part of it. I tell them what an argument is and how you can identify an argument. And then we have all these different exercises where I say, here's the premise, and I want you to figure out what type of argument that is, and we practice it. And that would be part of the coaching, that this skill of logic must be practiced, and you need to have that coaching moment where you're walking them through the process of learning and not just talking at them. So that's the second method, is that you coach them, you help them actually practice developing these skills. And the third one is that you have discussions. There's a reason this is the third, because you really can't have discussions on something that they don't know anything about, or something that they've never practiced, and so it hasn't really sunk deep enough into them that they can have a discussion about it. So it comes third because it has built upon the other two. It also comes third because you can't have really excellent discussions with a 5-year-old. Not sure if you've noticed that, but you can teach them skills at that age. And so this, Socratic discussion, it's more of an older age thing, but it's also a culmination of all of the stuff that has come before, that at this point they're able to say, I do want to discuss this, and there is a logical problem with the way that Mortimer Adler outlaid his ideas here. He actually skipped something that I think is really important, and I think we need to discuss this and figure out what was wrong with his basic premise. That would be a Socratic discussion. You say, okay, what is his premise? Why did you feel there was something wrong with that? What do you think should have been there instead? And you just sort of ask questions and walk them through and let them use their logic and use their intuition, be able to put ideas together, and that just cannot be done any way except a discussion. So that third level, that is the deepest learning. It is the most important learning because they're using their cognition to create their own learning. They're firing inside their brain and making connections that enable them to really have things sink deep into who they are and really have this knowledge that have great meaning to them personally. So you want to have all three of these different types of teaching, these different teaching methods, in order to really do a good job. A lot of people get stuck on lecture because this is how most of us were taught, that we were just lectured at and then tested on our regurgitation of what we were lectured at. But some of us get stuck on just the Socratic discussions, and it's not okay to do just one of any of them. You really need to be able to have all of those to be able to have a well-rounded education so that you can explain what the basic knowledge is, and then help them develop those skills around that, whether that's reading or writing or logic or thinking or creating something, building something, whatever that is, helping coach them through that and then talking about it so that they can really sink in. Those three levels of or methods of teaching are really, really powerful when it comes to helping our kids really learn in ways that are impactful and meaningful and long-lasting, not just something they're regurgitating for the test. I thought this was super fascinating. I hope that you enjoyed this. You are doing some really, really important things in your life. Being a mom, being a dad is so, so important, and you're doing a much better job than you think you are. Keep it up. I will see you on the next one. Thanks.